Hello, and welcome to the Geopolitics Explained podcast. Today, in continuing to discuss the European Union, I'm going to delve into politics and freedom within the European Union. Europe has a few differences in its forms of government and in its electoral systems from country to country. These differences in isolation are interesting and are worth noting as I continue to explore the EU. But an aspect connected to this that we can draw more conclusions from is freedom. The EU ranks highly in freedom through multiple sources across a wide variety of areas, such as press freedom and internet freedom. But in recent years, freedom has been declining. This is seen in economic freedom and political freedom measures, but there are also deeper technological innovations that are contributing to this change, such as artificial intelligence and disinformation. So, as well as diving into the political systems and electoral systems in Europe, this deeper technological trend will also be an aspect that we'll discuss in today's episode and how this will affect the EU into the future. So, to begin, let's dive into political systems within Europe. The forms of government in Europe are distinguishable from one another because some are republics and others are monarchies. A republic is a state in which power resides with the people and their elected representatives, whereas a monarchy is a system where a single individual, typically a king or a queen, serves as head of state. In Europe, there are four such forms of government. The first is a presidential republic. This is where the president is the head of state and the head of the government. In the European Union, only Cyprus is a presidential republic. Next, we have a semi-presidential republic. This is where the president and the prime minister share several powers. France, Lithuania, Poland, Portugal, and Romania operate under such systems. Thirdly, we have the parliamentary republic. In such a system, the president is a ceremonial figurehead who has few powers. This is because countries in such systems are ruled via a parliament. 15 EU member states are parliamentary republics. These are then split into two branches, with 8 of the 15 countries electing a president via direct popular vote, and the other 7 electing a president via parliament. Finally, we have a parliamentary constitutional monarchy. In such a system, the monarch is legally not vested with political power, but does have some formal non-executive powers. Belgium, Denmark, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Spain, and Sweden are such systems. Now, it's also worth exploring self-governance at the regional level within the European Union. Again, to distinguish from state to state in the EU, there are 4 different branches that we can discuss here. Firstly, there is a unitary state. This is where most powers lie with the central government, and only minor or local issues are dealt with under the authority of regional governments. Most EU states operate under such a system. Moving on, there is then a devolved state. In this system, there is some delegation of power from central government to regional areas. For example, in Italy, the government has devolved several powers to the 20 regions that make up the country. Of these, many have a large degree of autonomy, including Sardinia and Sicily. Spain is another such example of a devolved state. Thirdly, we have a federacy. In such a system, several sub-state units have more power and independence than others. For example, Denmark has the Faroe Islands and Greenland. which are both autonomous but are not a part of the European Union. Other examples of a federacy are France, Finland, and the Netherlands. The final characteristic here when exploring regional governance is a federation. These are nations where regions within that country have equal powers. Austria, Germany, and Belgium are such examples of federations. So, now that we've determined the structure of the political system in countries in the European Union, let's dive into electoral and party systems within Europe. In exploring electoral systems, I will split countries into 3 different categories. Firstly, there are head of state elections. Then there are lower house elections, or elections in countries that only has 1 parliamentary chamber. And then in countries that have 2 parliamentary chambers, there are also upper house elections. Some countries in the EU only have a single parliamentary chamber, while others have both a lower house and an upper house. All EU countries, apart from the monarchies that we mentioned earlier, have a head of state, and so will also have head of state elections. The monarch is a symbolic role in these nations, and the Prime Minister is the democratically elected head of government. So returning to countries that have 2 parliamentary chambers, that being both a lower house and an upper house, we have the following states: Austria, Belgium, Czechia, France, Germany, Ireland, Italy, the Netherlands, Poland, Romania, and Spain. Other countries within Europe only have a lower house. Now, if we move on to electoral systems, focusing on Europe in its totality, including countries that exist within Europe but aren't in the EU, 40 out of 43 of these countries use a proportional system. Of the other 3, the UK operates a one-person-takes-all disproportionate voting system, as does Belarus. The final country is France, that employs a 2-round system, which typically amplifies larger parties, but is different from the UK's model. The electoral systems that are proportional that Europe uses are party list proportional representation, single transferable vote, mixed member proportional representation, and some systems are mixed, which involves a combination of a number of different voting systems. In mentioning Belarus and its electoral system, this raises the next topic that I want to discuss, and that is how free is Europe? The Freedom Index, which is listed by the World Population Review, dives into detail on the freedom of many countries around the world. The first element of the Freedom Index is human freedom, and this is constructed via 12 subcategories. These are rule of law, security and safety, movement, religion, association, assembly and civil society, expression and information, relationships, size of government, legal system and property rights, access to sound money, freedom to trade internationally, and finally, regulation. When we focus solely on human freedom, the top 10 countries in the world are the following: Switzerland, New Zealand, Denmark, Ireland, Sweden, Estonia, Iceland, Luxembourg, Finland, and Norway. Of this top 10, 6 countries are in the European Union, and 3 more, those being Norway, Iceland, and Switzerland, are also integrated into many European mechanisms due to their geographic proximity to the EU. This, in isolation, is a very promising aspect for the European Union. Diving deeper into this, human freedom is constructed by a combination of two other metrics. These are personal freedom and economic freedom. If you head over to the blog post on Substack that I released on the 28th of July, you will find links to this index and you'll be able to explore more of the information at your own leisure. Also included in this index are press freedom and internet freedom. The top 10 for press freedom are as follows: Ghana, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, the Netherlands, Finland, Estonia, Portugal, Ireland, and Switzerland. Again, some of the same nations that we saw in the human freedom ranking also emerge here in the press freedom scores, and many of them are members of the EU or are associated with Europe geographically. As for internet freedom, the top 10 are Iceland, Estonia, Canada, Chile, Costa Rica, the Netherlands, Taiwan, Japan, the United Kingdom, and Germany. There are fewer EU nations present here in the internet freedom rankings, but still, some EU member states remain when measuring internet freedom. Now, to ensure that we also explore another source, there is a freedom characteristic indicator published by Reporters Without Borders. The categories of freedom that this report explores are security, social freedom, legal freedom, political freedom, and economic freedom. A score of less than 55 in each of these indicators is chosen to imply a difficult situation. Both economic freedom and political freedom are below this benchmark level. Social freedom, legal freedom, and security freedom sit above the benchmark of 55, but the worry should be focused on rising economic inequality and falling political freedom. Now, we can explore these datasets in isolation to pick out conclusions, but it's in the trends and changes over time that we can draw better conclusions. From this data, we saw that 21 nations in the world had very serious freedom problems in 2021. In 2025, this has risen to 36 nations possessing very serious freedom problems. The categories above this are described as difficult freedom problems and problematic freedom problems. The number of nations in these categories from 2021 to 2025 has actually decreased. This could indicate that in the least free countries, freedom problems are getting worse, whereas those in the middle are slowly improving in freedom measures. When we look at the top freedom characteristic, this is described as good. The number of good nations from 2021 to 2025 has also decreased. This could be a consequence of increasing economic inequality in developed nations especially. In 2025's data, only Norway achieved a good score across all 5 metrics. So, the European Union ranks high when it comes to freedom, especially when explored in isolation and when compared to other regions around the world. However, in some characteristics, especially political and economic freedom, there are some warning signs. This could be an indication that these countries are as free as they're ever going to be, because there is no more freedom to be had, or it could imply that these nations took freedom too far, and now they want more control once again. In discussing freedom, there also needs to be a mention of technological aspects of freedom, such as disinformation, foreign influence, and social media propaganda campaigns. While the datasets that I've discussed today can tell us a story, the underlying shifts and why these shifts are occurring can still be difficult to pinpoint. One pursuit of freedom involves the value of free speech. Disinformation can undermine this democratic process and can also undermine social trust. In recent years, we've seen election denial narratives and vaccine debates contribute to such disinformation. These campaigns, at best, can see internal tension and confusion rise, and at worst, can destabilise countries. In general, they exploit the openness of democratic systems. Social media also works to amplify these efforts, with polarising content spreading much faster. Bots, fake accounts, and paid influencers can distort narratives. Controlling a narrative is powerful. So powerful that it can drive the future of our world and affect our individual lives. The confusion, cynicism, and distrust that these narratives are contributing towards are decreasing global freedom. This can paralyse us, it can make us doubt everything, and it is completely outside of our control. Emerging tech, such as artificial intelligence, deepfakes, and cloned voices, will only exaggerate this. We've already seen such examples in the real world during the 2023 Slovakian election and during the Ukraine war. As we look forward into the future and the European Union as a free and open place to live, if people are misinformed and confused and distrustful, are they truly free? This trend has emerged aggressively in recent years, and it will continue to exist as this technology becomes more ingrained in our everyday lives. So, to wrap up, I will leave you with a question. How can we protect freedom if freedom is being used to destroy itself? I've been Dylan. I'll talk to you next time.